And we are live. So, Mr. Ferhat, it's a pleasure to see you, as always. I can tell. It's a man living in the warrior spirit, truly an inspiration. And yeah, you seem in a very, very good mood today. So I'm very excited to continue our conversation. And for our listeners, I have a few words to explain what's going on. So Ferhat and I, we talked, had the first conversation about my book, about the themes about my book back last year, and then due to and I would say a certain oversight on my part, we were only able to cover 4 topics, and then had to postpone the 5th one, the topic about role model. And as I say, and I've learned in the past, since we have to train our minds to see the good in every situation, and that's what I'm practicing every day. So now I can say I look forward to covering the topic of role models today with you, Ferhat. And now it's been a few months, so we have learned, we have grown in this period, and maybe we engage about some very insightful things that have happened in the meantime. So without further ado, I'm very excited to talk with you today, Ferhat. And let's start. Is there anything you'd like to share about role model, and what does it mean in the context of working in the warrior spirit?
Maybe first of all, good to be back. 2 things. You are still my role model, so this has not changed. So that's number 1. And the reason I look happy, whenever I see you, I'm happy. So these are kind of 2 points that I wanted to start with, because talking to you always brings me into a nice and kind of spiritual mood. So I'm really pumped for this discussion, despite a lot of meetings that I've had already today. So quite excited.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And I mean, with regards to role models, I think our last discussion sometime in November, I think I talked a lot about Marcus Aurelius already, being one of my, let's say, major role models in life, because Marcus Aurelius, for everyone who doesn't know him, he wrote this book, Meditations, which is kind of his diary that he never intended to publish to the world. Older than 2,000 years. This guy was a Roman emperor, had a lot of power, but I mean, I don't particularly like him for this reason, but for the fact that he was very self-aware, very much focused on the directing mind. And that's why, you know, to quote your book, I mean, being in the warrior spirit, I think makes one responsible to be quite self-aware and focus on being rational and understand what one can influence and what one cannot influence. And he's, to me, the best example for a person that has power but is still very reflected and very rational in how he behaves in the world.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the part about separating the self from the emotional levels in that context?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a very emotional person, but I had to learn to control my emotions and not identify myself with the thoughts and with the emotions I have in my body, you know. And it sounds quite theoretical or intellectual, but it's really, there needs to be, in my point of view, an intellectual framework that helps one to challenge the emotional sides. And I mean, for me, reading about Marcus Aurelius and other people that are just intending or trying to be as rational as possible is just very helpful to remind myself, especially when I have something to be emotional about, to still stick to trying to be as rational as possible, right? So, and I say that as being someone that is really quite emotional, you know, but I need the reminder that going into the directing mind and being as rational as possible can only be beneficial to me.
Mm-hmm. What do you practice? How do you enable yourself to do that? And what are what are the situations where it's still maybe the most difficult parts in this kind of activity?
I mean, especially before important meetings or especially when I know that something might be quite stressful in my day, I try to make it a deliberate effort to meditate in the morning. You know, just kind of force myself in a let's say in a more self-aware state, emotional state, just to be prepared, to be flexible when stress does appear. And obviously you can never be 100% prepared, and you'll always be emotional, so there's nothing like perfect, right? But I mean, excellence is what I strive for, but I fully accept that I'm never going to be able to achieve it.
This is the concept of the ideal, right? The idea that we are striving towards, that gives us guidance, that gives us a point of orientation.
Indeed, and it forces our mindset to think about the target state, and yeah, it's really, it's trying to shoot for the stars and being fine with just reaching the moon. You know, it's absolutely.
I have been observing myself how it's a constant. It's almost like a constant circulation, or there's another word which maybe I'll remember later. But there's the oscillation. Yes, that's the word. The oscillation between spending time to visualize this ideal, and then also picturing also the other scenarios that could happen, which is, I think, extremely important, because it can help you face those other, let's say, less desirable scenarios. Yes. But then also become at ease with those as well, because yes. Otherwise the huge danger is, if you don't spend enough time, at least from my point of view, picturing also those other scenarios, you will tend to get emotional, or actually stressed and anxious about it, or even scared.
Good point. Yes.
I mean, what you just described about the meditation, it goes back to chapter 1 about groundedness, right? This is so always very interesting to me. That's why when I structured the book in these five themes, it became clear to me that of course there's an interplay. There's not necessarily a sequence, but you can sometimes build a sequence as well. So we can see here again how important it is to be able to tap into this groundedness, and to remember, and to make a kind of like a muscle memory. And I've actually noticed this as well. There's always challenges, and there's always things which can, you are faced with new scenarios and new consequences, and there's a risk to become stressed. And then it's really training yourself to recognize that topic, that kind of emotion or the feeling, and then reacting to it in the right way, and not running away from it, not ignoring it, not definitely not trying to even make it like numbing it, like drinking alcohol because you're stressed or something, but like the opposite, meditating, exercising, and just focusing on this.
Absolutely, yeah. And also maybe trying to also not see stress as something negative, and just being rational and trying to be also in this growth mindset helps me to sometimes also appreciate the stress, so just kind of I know that overcoming stress will help me in growing as a human being, so it's also like just having that connotation of what is stress really. Is it something negative? And I think the metaphor of let's say stress and like how a muscle only grows when you stress it out. It can only grow once you went through the stress, and the muscle grows then basically in the relaxation mode. So I feel the same about stress a little bit. So stress per se is nothing negative.
And when you picture the situation right before these important meetings, and then really like going into the meeting, how have you, I would say, grown into how you focus your mind, or you use that energy? Is there like now a pattern kind of like emerging? Maybe you can explain that or describe that.
I mean, one friend once told me, probably 14 years ago, he was kind of saying, hey, you're a pretty reflected person. And I was quite proud, and we had this discussion, and I was like, hey, do you think, since I'm so reflected already, so wise already, do you think I'll find all the solutions to life soon? And the guy responded, he said, no, you'll just ask more questions, which is a very philosophical response. And I mean, I love this guy. I mean, if you listen to this, Bela, shout out to you. Bela, my friend who I got to know in the US, in Detroit, Michigan. But the reason I bring up the story is maturing is not only a consequence of reading, it's also just a consequence of living. And what I mean with that is I realized that just by having grown as a person, being a father of 2 kids, has just helped me to mature in a different way. And just the way I handle stress or other things, I'm just more capable of handling them. And I would say, objectively, in stressful situations, I know I can trust myself more, because as a human being, I know that I am better suited to deal with also new circumstances that no one can necessarily prepare for. So to answer your question very, very specifically, I have developed, I don't know if you call it more love or more trust into myself in handling difficult situations that I'm not familiar with, by the fact just of having grown so much more in the past 20 years.
This is a great point, and to me, the thought comes to my mind that it's really underestimated, and I think we covered this also in the first part of the conversation. It's underestimated often how much being a father, being a parent, contributes to that maturation process, because when we translate now, I mean, we're talking about work most of the time here, but when we translate that topic now to work, it's, work is not about life or death. But when it comes to children, this is actually, something which is much bigger than our own existence, ideally. And also, of course, some of the risks and some of the scenarios that pop up into our heads as parents are very much about these kind of questions as well, and about the risks that life has to offer, and finding that groundedness and that strength to face that as well, because we cannot control reality. And at some point, when the kids are grown up, there is hardly any control that we can have over them. It's only that period now where we can invest in the education and in the values that we teach them, and then of course we can still be there to support them, but there's no control. So we don't know. So we have to face that reality as well.
Indeed.
So now I wanted to. There's definitely two other things, elements of this that I find extremely fascinating. One is I make it always clear, and I make it clear in the book in several pieces, that I don't want to explain to people that they have to strive to becoming a role model, but that once you tap into the warrior spirit and you work according to those values, that by default you can become a role model. So it's a very much it's a thin line where we have to strive to work towards this ideal, but not being ego driven to wanting to become this role model, because that will just be, I would say, vanity. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and how do you see what I mean, and do you experience that as well?
Yeah, like having this immigration background as I have, when I was younger, I was always looking for someone to guide me, to mentor me, to show me the path a little bit, because I was always the first kid in my family to let's say be eligible to study. Then I was the first one to actually get a bachelor's degree, the first one to move to the US, so I was always kind of the first, but I was always looking for a mentor. And just growing up, I aspired to be a mentor to others, but I believe that becoming or being a mentor should never be the end goal. It's, as you're saying, it's a natural consequence of doing the right things. And and obviously you've met some of my employees, and just being more experienced than others, being kind of a guide, or providing guidance to younger, let's say, employees or friends, it's just very fulfilling, And when I was younger, I was looking for a mentor. Then I desperately wanted to become a mentor, but I realized it should not be a goal itself. It's I think it's better to just accept it as a consequence of doing the right things. And then, I mean, it's just very fulfilling to help others. And others, makes you a mentor, then I appreciate that conclusion. But I realized that it should not be, the goal itself should not be to be a mentor. It should be
Yes.
just to help. So I think we agree on this aspect.
Absolutely. I think there's even two. So I'm picturing two elements. One is taking charge, taking command. Being leadership. That is essential in some situations for sure. And the kind of things that we strive to do. So this is one element. But then the other one that I think you're describing is more this idea that now basically I would associate almost with having a it's almost what people do, like psychologists do, or like a therapist do. They never give you any answers.
Yeah.
They ask questions. They only ask questions. They enable the patient or their client, so to speak, to come to their own conclusions about what is the right thing to do for them. And I think this kind of sounds like how you're describing it.
I'm smiling because one of my favorites, and I'm not going to be able to give you the exact quote, but one of my favorite, let's say, quotes that Socrates supposedly said was that he said something like that. He said, "I am just a midwife that is not capable of having any innovative thought myself, but I gladly accept helping others to have very fruitful, innovative thoughts." So that's kind of exactly the point of Socrates. He's famous for supposedly having asked people many, many questions to bring people to the conclusion themselves. So I fully agree with you. And I mean, obviously, that I've been a consultant for now more than 10 years. So Socrates is definitely also one of the people that I look up to. And that's the whole point, for me, also realizing that bringing people to wisdom, is let's say a nice goal. But I think having a lot of experience now, I realize like people need to find the light themselves, and if I can, let's say, accompany that journey by asking smart questions, I'm quite a happy guy. Yeah.
Yeah, this is also what I've been very observing as well now. Being in a situation where a company is going through an insolvency process, and then also and then really being able to support people in staying grounded themselves. And it happens so often that people, they cling to a certain opinion, or they cling to a certain scenario, and it's not like this scenario is unlikely to happen, or it's not the right one. I mean, it could very well happen. But the point is, in this process, it's very important to explain to them that while this is the desirable outcome, we need to ask some questions as well. What if this? What if that happens? So and this is how this, I think what you're describing is that it seems to me, because this way it might cause in the immediate moment, it might cause them some pain, some stress, because they are in danger of becoming attached to that ideal scenario. But this might not take place. So while it might be in the moment difficult to go remove themselves from that scenario, it will help them in the long run, because things are developing, and if it turns out to happen differently, they will be better prepared to face that reality.
Absolutely, yes.
So there's something else which the next question, I think, or the next things that I wanted to explore is, so we talked about emotion in the beginning, and I address this in a way as well, because it's clear to me, and I think it's clear to us, that when it comes to working effectively in this kind of warrior mindset, that it's important to be very, very conscious about emotions. But I do cover in this in the chapter about the role model, I do cover something which is the third one here, where I say that it's also important to mourn defeats but also to celebrate victories. And with what I mean there is this is really, I think, for me, some kind of containment, or the kind of like the right outlet for the type of emotions. And that as a leader, or as a, in that warrior mindset, you have to give that space as well. And maybe to explain that, to capture it very, very, succinctly. And then I'd really like to get your thoughts on that as well. Is that what I observed, for example, with the celebration, sometimes with what I expect, what I perceived as weak leaders, was that something really, really great, with a great success was done, took place through hard work, through the team, and that these weak leaders almost try to stifle this kind of positive emotion by saying, but there's still work to be done, and we have to do other things, and this kind of thing. And it seemed to me very almost like in this kind of a survival kind of mindset, or kind of like this limited mindset, almost assuming that the other people will behave like children, and then they will not work anymore. And I have to step in and say, yes, this is great, but hey, let's get back to work. And I always experience that as very, very negative, or very kind of weak in a way. I don't know what do you think about that.
I mean, I think obviously depends on what the goal is for that unit, that team, to achieve, like how much of a goal it is that was achieved, and if there's really a need to celebrate this goal, or if there's an overarching goal. I think as a leader, you need to be also critical. Yes, I fully agree with you. If you achieve something, you should celebrate it. But obviously, it will depend on the situation, like how much was really achieved. I mean, just in general, I think as a leader, you need to be brutally honest to yourself, first of all. And then you need to kind of tailor how honest you are to your team, but if you achieve a major milestone, a big goal, absolutely you should celebrate, and you should not remind anyone that there's work tomorrow. And you should trust into the ability of your team that they know that they have to also continue working the next day. But it requires brutal honesty. This brutal, and I am all for celebrating success, and I'm also very much for being brutally honest to myself in terms of, hey, did I really F up? Because I'm convinced that we need failure also to be able to grow. Absolutely. But it requires this brutal honesty, and
yes.
And also, again, the self-awareness, like to not just trust your own emotions, but kind of question your own emotions, question your own thoughts.
That's true. That's very true, because the emotions can take you in both directions, but can fool you both into something more positive than it is, and also into something more negative than it is.
Yes, and it's just good to remind oneself, you are not your emotions.
Yes.
If you are aware, you are not your thoughts or your emotions. And that's the concept of going to the directing mind, kind of listening in, being self-aware and understanding, just from a very rational perspective. Do the emotions not, because emotions should not prevent you from doing the right thing. But often when we're lost in being the guys in the arena, then it's difficult to kind of circle back and say, all right, what is the right thing to do here? And that requires being brutally honest to yourself. And again, it sounds as if I manage this all the time, but obviously it's no one does. It's always
no. This is clear.
Yes.
Yeah. This is clear. This is something actually. This is takes us maybe in a bit of a different direction, but that's fine. That's the whole point of these conversations, because that's just what you said right now. Of course, that was going through my mind as well as I was writing the book, and then deciding on the title, and then thinking, yeah, wait a second, am I now presenting myself as being in this mindset the whole time, or being able to achieve this all the time? Of course not. Of course not. But it's all about writing down what are the things that we should strive towards, and then using that, having an orientation for these things. So yeah, I mean, it was something that I noticed when I was reflecting on some of these situations where I try to give some advice on how to enable also individuals who might be just starting their careers, or who are maybe in situations where they cannot quite understand what's going on, or they may be some confusion why maybe their supervisor or manager or leader, whatever, acts in a certain way. And I wanted to give some guidance here as well, also for individuals in that situation to understand, to have maybe also like a healthy detachment from that situation, and try to figure out, or give some perspectives on what could be going on with the manager as well. Doesn't mean that they can change anything about it, but at least they can get some healthy distance between the situation, because I think there's a lot of people out there who suffer in these situations, and find it difficult to get this kind of distance. And this is how, in these situations, sometimes it bothered me when a leader, a manager, was unable to kind of lean into that pause to say, okay, now we've done this, we've worked hard, now we celebrate, and then tomorrow we look at what could we have done better next, what should we do better next time, and take a cold hard look at that as well, and then learn from it, and then go on. So this has already been very, very fascinating. I'm gonna check here one more time, because these were actually the most important topics I wanted to cover anyway, but I think we have time for a little bit more. So I actually deliberately ended the entire, I would say, content, the section of my of the book, and I deliberately did this by waiting for the last point, be 100% constructive to the very last thing, because I think this is something that just resonated with me when I came across this the whole time. And I actually came across this in this deliberate way when I first learned about negotiations at Accenture. And there was a lot of theory, and I'm not a negotiation expert at all, but it really resonated with me, with this kind of a mindset about how to do business, and how to do business with other companies, other clients, anyone really, and having that kind of that groundedness to, again, take the emotion out, take the speculation out, and just ask and figure out, okay, where is the space to make a deal? Where's the space to come together and to have something constructive? And I mean, you're the one who's the negotiation expert here, so maybe you have some points of view about this.
On being constructive, or on what?
Yes, being constructive in any type of like business relationship and interaction.
Yeah, I think again it builds a little bit on my self-identity, that I believe into growing. I believe into a positive outcome for myself, and that kind of makes me want to be constructive with everyone else also. I mean, again, negotiations are, the context of a negotiation is very dependent on the situation. So it's difficult to say, always be. I mean, obviously, you should always try to be as constructive as possible to increase the size of the pie with the counterpart in a negotiation. But actually, emotions sometimes are also a tool in a negotiation. So I'm not going to dive into that specifically, but I absolutely believe that there's a lot of value in trying to be always as constructive as possible, and not necessarily to please the other party, but in my self-identity, how I define myself, and at the end of the day, I'm a sum of my values. I want to have the feeling of being a person of integrity, and being a person of integrity, I believe, requires me to be as constructive as possible. And again, sometimes, maybe also in the past, I struggled sometimes with the tone of feedback to my teams. That's certainly that certainly that was true in some cases where I was probably not always constructive. But still, I fully believe that being constructive is a requirement in working with others. Like in on the quest to also improve other people and help other people in becoming better.
Mm-hmm. And have there been situations where you wanted something, not maybe from your superiors, but let's say you're working with a business partner, and there was a goal that you strove towards, or you wanted something, and then you had to almost negotiate or have a conversation with this person, and then think more creatively about where's the meat here, where's the the win-win, or maybe how to make that pie bigger, as you said.
Yeah. If there was a situation like that, or what's your question?
Yeah. Can you think of a situation where this was a challenge, maybe, and then how did you deal with it?
I mean, this is basically a challenge every day in my life, So obviously, my life situation also has changed slightly since our last discussion. Now being in a more, I would say, permanent role than before, while still advise some companies. But I certainly am in many times in situations where I need to convince others to move closer to what my goals are. And but I think it's not necessarily related to let's say the content of your book only, because it's more than about like what are influencing strategies, etc. But again, I think the guardrails are still being constructive, having integrity, and trying to do the good while still living the warrior spirits.
And I think it's like I have like one more question, and then if you have any other thoughts then that you would like to share, then we have still time for that as well. How do you now? I mean, and you just mentioned how you moved into this more permanent role. How has this changed now? When you think about the concept of this role model, is this now becoming more important as you're in this permanent role, or has it just changed, or is it no change at all? It's like, how do you feel?
You mean me being a role model for others, or having role models?
Yeah. Yes. No, being a role model for others.
I mean, I still, on the journey and in my career, obviously climbing the ladder of, let's say, roles at this large consulting company was quite interesting, because I think with every level, as you're also describing in your book, you're automatically in a position where you need to be a role model for others. I think that was quite natural in that environment of this large consulting company. But then when I started my own business in 2020, obviously in my own consulting business, I didn't have the same structures that were existing in a large consultancy. And now this is quite an exhaustive answer maybe, but I always struggled a little bit with, should I hire enough, or should I hire more people and then be a role model, educate them, teach them? But since I was the owner of the business, there was always the risk of them leaving me, which happened many times actually. In 4 years, I hired a lot of people, more than 20 people. And I mean, the fluctuation was quite high. So educating people, being a mentor, coaching them, and then losing them again showed me also there's not always an ROI in being a mentor. But then again, being, trying to do the right thing, it was still the right step to try to educate the people in my team, knowing that
of course
I might lose them after 6 months, 7 months, or a year, which was part of the business model. So like accepting that the role of a mentor for certain people in that environment of my own business was more finite. It was clear like that this is not something for let's say forever. But now in a more permanent, obviously the hypothesis or the assumption of being in that role is that of a more infinite timing, and that changes, let's say, the expectation to myself of being a mentor, and let's say working in an even more sustainable manner with the people in my team. So absolutely, there's a change, because ultimately the goal changes when you are working in a company instead of having your own business. That is very much dependent on the market circumstances, and consulting is quite volatile, and that volatility forces you to think more short term sometimes when it comes to being an employer. And that's certainly changed with this more permanent role now.
Yeah. That makes total sense. I'm just thinking, as you mentioned, the ROI on the investing in someone, or like having that integrity. You could speculate, of course, that by being true to these values and treating people that way, you can speculate that they actually stayed only for as long as they stayed because they did that. If you hadn't done that, maybe they would have left earlier. You could look at it from that point of view as well, right? So, and I think what I'm trying to say is that, and this is also the whole point that I wanted to tap into here, is how do we connect to something which transcends maybe something that as you say, a measurable ROI in terms of investment, or like hard cash, so to speak. But also, why do we act in an ethical way? Why do we act in that moral way? Because it's fair, it's respectful people. So there's kind of a really interesting mix here between the different motives. And who knows, the ROI might be a very, very, very long game. Could be that some of these people, come back to you at, in, I don't know, in 10 years or something, or maybe who knows what they're going to be doing. So it's an interesting.
I just that it's better to not expect that, and it's better to not behave in a way where you necessarily expect an ROI in the long run, but just assume that, this is probably better to manage the own emotional environment, to just assume that there might be an ROI, but not expect it, because if you expect it,
yes,
you can also be quite disappointed, and I learned that when I first started the business with, let's say, with the natural fluctuation of employees, but also the volatility in the business sense, like not having a large enough team when I had a lot of business, or I had a big team when I had a little business. That was quite a learning. But I learned to not have high expectations in terms of what the ROI will be.
It's absolutely right. This is absolutely right, because and it's clear to me why. Because if you have an expectation, then it becomes about ego again. Because when you behave, ethically, morally, and then it's not, you don't do it because of your ego, but it's because it's the right thing to do. So, and by doing this way, it becomes not in that sense kind of like measurable, as an ROI, but it is the right thing to do, because it again fosters the realization, or like the actual outcome, that you do become a role model again by default to them, because you treat them in that way. And by that, there is an ROI, I would say, that you cannot measure, because you are influencing positively, not just this person, but by doing this, and by being this example, also by influencing others through these people. So we're getting into a bit of a spiritual topic here, but I like it. Anyway, Ferhat, this has been great. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Because I think we've covered a lot of fascinating things.
Contrary to the first time we spoke, actually in Barcelona a couple months back, I obviously, you can see it here in the background, your book. I had the privilege to, I think, read it as the first person, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
And yes. I definitely did enjoy it a lot. I love the actionable, let's say, the actionable thoughts, and for me, I like to read, but for me this was really a great reminder. And if I can share, just again, I'm not able to quote the entire thing, but Theodore Roosevelt, he has this short text about being the man in the arena. I'm not sure. Do you know this one?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend just anyone to kind of check out your book first of all, but then also check out this. I think it was a speech, this man in the arena speech, which is basically saying similar things that your book is emphasizing. Trying to do the right thing, being honest to yourself, and don't be afraid of consequences if you're doing the right thing, and also accept that we will fail and that we need to get up. So. I really like. I am proud that I was the first one to read this book. It was a great reminder, and for me, it's definitely one of the key messages that you're given in your book, and especially for people with a consulting background. I think it's a fantastic read that helps one to evolve and work on oneself to get better. So. Really appreciate the privilege of having had the chance to read this as the first person, and knowing some of the stories actually myself from the time when we worked together.
Well, thank you so much for it, and I really appreciated your feedback, because it really gave me, at the time, it was just that final check where I was able to, some of the details that got lost during the editorial process. And that was very valuable. So thank you again for this. So that was great. And yeah, thank you for the time today and for the exchange. It's been really cool, really fascinating. I'm going to most likely release this before I release the first part of the conversation. But hey, we covered some cool stuff here. So yeah, thanks. And look forward to seeing you soon. And also at some point, hey, we're all growing, doing new things, so we can always revisit this kind of stuff. So. All the best to you, all the best to your family, and talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, mate.